Hello, good afternoon, good morning, and good evening, wherever you are. My name is Peggy Jude, and I'm with the Conference Board. I'm excited to be here today talking with you about work from home programs. We have some great content. Here's what we're going to be talking about today. Some of the critical questions and issues include what is a structured work from home program and what are the components? Equipping managers and employees to work from home effectively, measuring the effectiveness of a work from home program, and sharing some great lessons learned. I do want to add that we have so much amazing content today that we probably won't get to it all. We're interested in what you're interested in and do welcome your questions or comments in the chat, but please know that we might not get to your question and we will follow up with you after the webinar. Before we dive in, let's go over a few things. You can earn credits for your participation in today's call, HRCA, HRCI, SHRM, and CPE credits. You can just click the CEU request pod at the bottom right corner of the webcast console to sign up for credit. You need to stay online for the entire webcast to get credit and click OK for the 3 pop-ups that occur during the program. Credit available for participation is for live webcast only. I would like to introduce our guest for today. Joining me is Amy Freshman with ADP. Amy has been running the work from home program there for the past 8 years. We're delighted to have her with us to share some of the many things she's learned about flexible work over the years. Amy, welcome.
Peggy, thank you. So
I
excited
am
to be here
delighted to have you
today.
join us. Let's start with a little bit about your background. I know you've been leading the work from home program at ADP for the last 8 years, but actually work from home is a little bit more personal for you.
It is, Peggy. I've been very fortunate. I just hit my 25th year anniversary at ADP and very nostalgic these days in looking back at my time. But I think I've had the unique experience that I've lived all sorts of worlds within my organization. So I was a full-time office worker, although I was in sales, so there was always a little bit of flexibility built into that. I was in a role in 2007, 2006, 2007, where I was focused on leadership development. So I was traveling a ton. Typical work week for me would be I would go into the office on Monday. I would travel by train, plane, car, Tuesday through Thursday. Fridays, depending upon my week, sometimes I would go to the office and sometimes I would just work remotely. And I was working um, for within the same building as a friend of mine who was the VP of sales at the time. And he called me up and said, hey, so I just hired a new leader and you're never here. So I'd like to ask that you come and pack up pack up your items and bring them home. And I'd really like to use your office. I was sort of doing it, again, inherently anyway, based on my role. But I find it funny that my story, I think, is very similar to how others transition to a work from home environment. What I mean by that is, um, by the nature of the role, the day to day responsibilities, especially for, I'll say, knowledge workers, road warriors, we are physically where we need to be every day, given what we have in front of us. And so when a role like that really lends itself to, I have the autonomy to sort of decide, either the role dictates it for me that I need to be at a client site or at another facility, it really lends itself to much more flexibility, i.e. the ability to work from home, and certainly with technology and everything else. And fast forward the tape, in 2012, had I known, I was asked to come in and lead our work from home program, which we now really call flexible work arrangements, which I know we'll talk a little bit about. But it's really that thinking about how, where, and when work gets done. So
Lots
I've
of
lived
great
all the worlds,
experience.
Peggy, is the story.
So let's find out a little bit about our audience today. We have a quick poll we're going to ask you to take. So if you would focus on our first poll here and let us know your results. We'll share the results at the end with everyone.
Seems we have a clear winner so far here, Peggy.
Yes. Okay, so we will end this in 5 more seconds. If you haven't had a chance, please take the poll. Ending in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. We'll share the results now. So the reality is that it looks like the winner is more than half the population had work from home on ad hoc only. So not a more formal program, it looks like. We have some other folks who've had anytime they wanted or a few days per week. But we're in a whole different world now, aren't we? So let's move on here. Thanks for everybody sharing their status with us. Can you share a little bit about the program's journey, bringing us up to pre-pandemic time? So you've been doing it for 8 years. What was it like? Where did you get to? How did you get there before the pandemic?
Yeah, it's a good question, one I get asked quite often. Just quick reflection also on the poll, that tells me that the level of change has been extremely large these last 6 months for most of the folks at least tuning in today. So I recognize that, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But listen, work from home has been around for decades. It's not a new concept. I know when you and I were chatting on some of our calls previous to today, I started at ADP, I was in sales, I was given a stack of papers, right? I wasn't even given a laptop. I'm feeling very old when I tell that story. But my point is that technology wasn't really near where it is today. And so through the years, with the onset of technology, call it a laptop for most, people really started to work where they needed to. I mentioned it a bit ago, right? That whole knowledge workers, and where I have the opportunity and the role lends itself to more flexibility. That's really how work from home, remote work, right? Whatever you want to call it, came to be. And so pre-pandemic, when I took on this role, back in 2012, and then even fast forward to early part of 2020, depending on the year, we had somewhere between 15 and 20% of our US population that was tagged work from home. And I'll just make a quick call out to say, tagged work from home is you are in the HR system listed as a work from home worker, which means you don't have a seat in a facility. I'll just, go off the cuff and say, we've got lots of other people that likely work from home, and actually very similar to the poll questions or answers that we asked, Peggy, of like, well, 1 day a week or 2 days a week or ad hoc. It was more of having that flexibility, knowing that I've got the right technology. And so as an organization, and it was about when I came into this role, I should say a few years before I came into this role, many people who moved to a work from home arrangement, those numbers started to really tick up. And I often use this phrase to say we woke up in the year 2008. We had 1,500 people working from home with no parameters, no policy, no structure, right? It was just, hey, Peggy, yep, that sounds great. Your spouse got relocated. Just go take your laptop and go work from Anytown, USA. And that's really how it happened. And so we knew very quickly with a number like that, we needed to address the population. We needed to pull ourselves together, understand what does it mean to us, what's our philosophy, what's our position, build out our very first policy, which we'll talk about. And so it really transformed and sort of grew organically, was never really an initiative for us, and really still isn't, right? It's more of a offering that we have, and it's available, again, depending upon the role. We believe in flexibility, but that's really kind of where it came to, I'll say, pre-pandemic times.
Okay, so over the last few months, we've all been hearing all kinds of new terms: virtual, remote, flexible, dispersed, WFH, which is work from home, or WFA, which is work from anywhere. How do you think about all those definitions?
Yeah, I'll share, and I actually pulled this from Global Workplace Analytics, Kate Lister, who's a phenomenal, done a ton of research on remote work and flexible work, etc. And I think I pulled it from one of her white papers. So back in the 70s, those were really the first two terms that were coined, right? Telework and telecommute. So telework, substitution of technology for travel, and then telecommute was the substitution of technology for commuter travel, right? So thinking about those two. So very, I'll say, specific and focused definitions. Over time, it really came into, and how I refer today and to it today, and many other colleagues that I work with outside my organization as well. I've got a very large, very strong network of thought leaders in this space. Remote work is work completed anywhere outside of a traditional office space. Home, co-working space, hotel lobby, a train, a plane, right? I mean, I can go on and on. But other than the work that happens sitting at a physical workstation or an office, if you have that available to you in your workspace, that's really remote work. So now the next layer of the conversation plays into this term flexible work. So flexible work really considers all variations of where, when, and how work gets done. So because of technology, or as a result of the great technology that we have, many roles lend itself to have greater autonomy and opportunity to say, I wake up on a Monday morning, I have a webcast I'm doing with the conference board, I know I have a project because I have a deliverable on Wednesday, I need some focus time there. Where am I going to do the work? Where's the best place for me? This is my normal home office space that you all can see the back, what's behind me. This is my typical space, but there are definitely times where I undock from my computer and I go over to my kitchen, or I go sit outside on a nice day. And again, it's a very small definition or example of remote work, but I have the opportunity to think about the work that's in front of me and where is best for me to do that work. Many people work off hours. If I know right now my daughter's in in-person school, but I have to pick her up at 1:00, and I trade off with a neighbor and we share that responsibility, but I know that I'm not going to be in front of my computer during that time. So are there other things I can be doing? I take that time and I move it someplace else. So Peggy, to answer your question, there are so many different terms. The way that we think about it as an organization is it's all under, I call it the umbrella of flexible work arrangements. And again, it's the where, when, and how work gets done. So, pre-pandemic, post-pandemic, flexible work is here. It's always been here. I think this has really given us a real push to test the waters as it relates to flexible work.
Challenging times. So ADP's been at this for a long time. I'd like to talk a little bit about the policy component you mentioned briefly. Can you tell us a little bit about the factors that are included in your work from home policy?
Yeah. So we do field this question quite a bit from other organizations. I just presented to a small client, actually about 25 employees this morning. They have some operations in the US and they've got a pretty decent sized operation in India. And so anyway, I was addressing and working with the owner and founder in the last couple of weeks. And this was one of the topics that had come up. When we went to write our policy, and by the way, it's gone through many iterations. I'm happy to say it's shrunk in the number of pages. Initially, I think we just tried to cover everything. And then over time, we really kind of zeroed in on what's most important. It's important for us that we start with the philosophy, the definition, like how are we setting the stage to what is work from home? Like, what does it mean to us as an organization? It then sort of morphs into what I call very basics. Eligibility, what are the components, home office conduct, what really is thread through the policy above and beyond what's different because I work from home is all of the same standards, ethical standards, right? Everything lives regardless of your work location, it's location agnostic. So what we really tried to cover within the work from home policy are things that are really specific to that program and to that work arrangement. You can't work from home if you don't have connectivity. So it does cover off on some of those pieces. It goes on around availability, expectations, and legal liabilities. But if I can hit on that availability piece, beyond reading a policy and acknowledging it through the process, and we've got a whole tracking system that's part of that process, what is written out in the policy, but we also really drive as an organization, is making sure that the manager and associate, or manager and employee, have ongoing conversations, not just from the beginning, but ongoing. So availability is a big piece. We are, utilizing very similar to technology than other organizations, such as, Teams chat or Link or, Skype, whatever they have. We need to make sure that employees are available and managers know when the employees are available. Again, likely not very different from an office-based worker. I think the biggest shift and change, which I think we'll spend a little bit of time on, is if I'm used to seeing my entire team sitting outside my office, and I can step outside and say, "Hey, Peggy, I know you're working on this project. What do you think about this? Or have you thought about this?" I now have to ping you to find you. So it's different. Many managers, not to digress, but many managers are very comfortable with the virtual reach out as opposed to the, physical in-person present reach out. But for some, I think it's a harder spin. But the policy really needs to include all of the key points and major items. But again, I'll go back to the beginning, because I think it's important setting the stage with whether it's a formal philosophy or, just some foundational items of what does work from home mean. I think it's done a nice job setting the stage for our associates.
I think it's time for another poll. We have a poll now on what your company's doing about a work from home policy. So if you would take a look at the poll that's coming up here on the screen and share with us what your company is currently doing from a policy perspective. Okay, great. Thank you all for sharing, ending the poll, and sharing results with folks. Here we go. Looks like we have, wow, almost 60% of our folks actually have a remote working policy. So that's terrific. There is information in writing for people. But those of you who are in the process of building one or thinking maybe you should have one, hopefully you'll get some great takeaways today. So thanks for sharing with us. Amy, what do you think about the results here?
Yeah, no, and now, of course, I'm looking at the poll question again. Peggy saying maybe we should have asked it to say pre-pandemic, did you have one?
Exactly.
Or did you just create it within the last 6 months? I'm seeing I'm trying to watch the comments also of, we had one before, but we're definitely updating it now. So that's actually another option we could have included. But I'm happy to see it, if I can say that. It now more than ever, for sure. But even again, pre-pandemic, I think the way people are working, and what I didn't mention, which I should have, which is I talked about, legal and that sort of thing, but it's also security. That's another big piece. Recognizing and understanding that people have, in some cases, access to client data, customer information, et cetera. Being very mindful of security is really critical.
So I know that a work from home program means coordination across multiple departments within an organization. It takes a village to make this work, and people have learned that since the pandemic. But can you talk about the relationship between the program and the various supporting organizations that it takes to make the program work effectively?
No doubt. And I think you said it. It definitely takes a village. I would also share that it's evolved over time. So I think, as many organizations, and some of you probably listening in today, we continue to get better in this space, recognizing that there are many different departments, people within departments, different viewpoints, new technology that comes into play. I hate to call it, we're talking about security, right? New threats that come into play where we really need to address the population. And advanced technologies have also been a key component for us. So without question, whatever your organization calls it, your information technology team, IT, as continued advancements occur within the technology, ensuring that we're not just thinking about office space and infrastructure within an office, right? We now have an extended network of people who work from home. And I'm again talking somewhat pre-pandemic time, but clearly plays now. I will say that as an organization, we have done a tremendous job over the last several years doing what we can to have our work from home associates have an identical experience as those in the office. So when I worked in the office, I would, bring my laptop, old school desktop, would be sitting there for me. I would just turn it on in the morning. I'm on the network, right? My phone is ready, my keyboard, everything's ready to go. And I would say I moved into the role in 2012. So maybe it was like 2015, 16, something like that. We were really able to say that the work at home setup is consistent with that of an office-based worker. So we have some pretty cool technology that when I sit at my desk, so I commute, I walk from my room to my office space, and I turn my computer on or I log back in, I am fully network capable, with proper tunnels and proper security and all those different pieces. So anyway, I spend too much time, but technology is a big piece. Then you think about partnerships with procurement of technology, right? So not just having the technology, but actually physically getting it shipped and delivered, et cetera, configured. Finance is another area where partnerships are critical. So we did a number of studies over the years, and there's lots of questions on what do you reimburse for? I mentioned Kate Lister. She actually just posted a poll out on LinkedIn asking this very question. What do you submit for expense? What do you provide for them? Do you give a stipend, right? Companies decide on their own what they do. Another huge area, and I think someone asked about it, which is training. So training for leaders, training for associates. I would really, I can't stress this enough, that the training programs, the offerings, etc. So embedded within the content of the training, whatever that training is to ensure that you have a virtual component. So, I often joke, which is not a joke, we will never get 58,000 people sitting in one building together. So we will always be somewhat virtual to each other. I happen to work from home outside of Massachusetts. In Massachusetts for a company that's based in New Jersey, but I've worked with a number of different leaders over the years. No one's ever worked with me in my home office, so I will always be remote, I think is my point. So just making sure that from a training perspective, training has an eye on remote work. Dispersed teams is another word that we talked about a little bit earlier. And lastly, which is critical, is working closely with the facilities organization, because as the remote workforce, I'll say, has grown over the years, and obviously within these last 6 months for sure, when we get back to some semblance of normal, and there is signs are indicating that there will be more remote workers globally than pre-pandemic, just because we've proven that remote work can work. Having said that, we still will have buildings and that sort of thing. But my point is ensuring that there is space. So I'm a work at home worker, but I would visit the office for different meetings. So having whatever you call them, hot seats, hoteling, touchdown spaces, a place for people to go who I don't have a seat there, but I do travel there. So partnering with the real estate organization, space planning, et cetera, to think about a much more mobile and fluid workforce. So those are, I would say, Peggy, the key areas and departments across the organization that
So Amy, you touched on it briefly about training. So people are interested in what kind of training you're doing to help equip employees to work effectively from home and for managers to manage a remote workforce. Can you talk a little bit about that in more detail?
Sure. So from the very beginning, whether I raise my hand and say to my leader, I'd like to go work from home, can I make the transition? Or there's a shift and change within the organization where I'm now in a position that's deemed to be remote. We have an entire tracking system. So from the very beginning and my colleague and I, Ryan, have run these sessions for as long as I've been in this role, I think. But it talks about everything from initial setup, how to get through the tracking system. There's approvals built in and that sort of thing. So why we continue to do those, even though some of the information seems somewhat elementary, we want to make sure we set the stage that, number one, this is not a new concept for us as an organization. We've been having people work remotely for decades. So that's one. Two is to make sure they understand all the different technology and programs that we have available. But three, to know that we're here to support them. So not just during the transition, but if they run into something in the future, or if they have a question, or gee, my second monitor broke, how do I get a new one, right? So some of those logistics. So a lot of that is around setting expectations and providing that support. The second piece of that is, and I sort of alluded to it a bit ago, is making sure that from a training, onboarding perspective, it's done with a lens of being somewhat location agnostic. So yes, we have classroom style training pre-pandemic where everybody would sit in a physical room for specific types of learning. Depends on the role, depends on the business unit, et cetera. But I also want to make sure we sort of delineate between, and this is my own maybe definition of, people talk about onboarding and training, I think, as the same thing, and I look at them slightly differently. So when I think about onboarding, I think about things like, here's who we are as a company, here's our process, here's what our culture is, here's how we operate as a business. So like kind of big picture items. And then when I think about, and included in that is who are we and career progression opportunities, right? And all those different pieces. Training for me is very specific to my business unit, my function, my role, like what are my day-to-day responsibilities, system access, like I need to be able to access ABC technology. What does that mean? What does that look like? How does it work? And so I delineate those two because I think it's important to think about each one of those, I'll say separately, but with the lens of remote work, dispersed teams. So long before the pandemic, right, we have leaders who have maybe a handful of people that sit outside their office, but there could be other team members that might sit in a different location. Forget about home office, a different building, maybe a different facility. And so how do you, as a leader, manage to that and create a space where people are feeling like it's a level playing field? And that is really most critical. So what we can do, what organizations can do, is ensure that their leadership training also covers off on that aspect of how do I lead in a dispersed work environment? So if I'm used to having everybody outside my office, that's one thing. But if I've got a mix or now everyone's remote. So we have modules on managing virtual teams, leading virtual teams. We want to make sure that it's not just the associate or the employee that we're focused on, but a critical component to that obviously is making sure that the leaders are really well equipped to lead in a virtual work environment
great.
as well.
That's terrific. There are a lot of individual specific logistics involved in getting someone set up to work from home. You talked about the fact that you have a process that you use, and can you tell us exactly what you provide for your work from home population?
Yeah. If I could just spin my camera around, you can actually see what my workspace looks like, and I would show you, but I won't. So we have an entire kit. It's like an a la carte kit, but I'll hit on the highlights, Peggy, for people that are wondering like what all is included. First and foremost, as part of the tracking system and as part of being what I call what we call tagged work from home, what that really means is we are fully provisioning the employee at home to be set up at home, which means the opposite end of that is that same employee does not maintain a seat in one of our facilities, right? You really get one official seat where we fully provision you. So that it's just important to think about that aspect from a real estate perspective. But what we provide, as I mentioned a bit ago, is really exactly what we would provide for an office-based worker. So most standard is one monitor. If your role lends itself, you get two. I have two. I have a headset. I have a keyboard. My laptop and docking station is over here. I've got a mouse, right? All the basics. Some of the technology that we instituted a few years back in my time with great partnership with our IT organization is we offer a piece of technology that connects to the home network that allows this super awesome magical tunnel, I call it, because I'm not a techie. So when I said I sort of wake up and I turn everything on, I'm automatically connected to my network. It's because of that piece of technology. So part of it is, I don't have to VPN in. I still have access to VPN, but for those that use a secure network like a Cisco, AnyConnect, that sort of thing, I don't need to log into it every day because I'm already in the network. So as an at-home worker, it's the best thing since sliced bread. But as part of that, we also have voice over IP technology. So back in the day when I first moved home, I had to get a second phone line, and ADP paid for it, so that it wasn't the cost, but it was sort of cumbersome if I have an additional phone line. Now it's all voice over IP. So I am fully connected. I have the same phone as my colleagues sitting in facilities around, I'd say around the world. I think it's pretty much around the world at this point. So those are some of the basics. If my role requires it, we will provide a printer. However, we're very mindful, obviously, of security and that sort of thing. So that you can ask for if you need it. But those are the main components. Same, whatever the technology is for each company, we happen to leverage and offer up WebEx Teams and, different things. So I have a very consistent experience as my office-based colleagues, which really, I think, goes to show how my organization has really invested and made sure that I'm having that equal experience. But it's critical for day-to-day productivity, for sure.
We actually have another poll. We're interested in what your employees get when they work from home. So if we could start this next poll, and we'd love to hear what your employees get when they work from home. Oh.
This I'm curious about, Peggy, as people are voting, because I hear such varying degrees of what people provided or provide. And again, with the onset of this work from home thing for the last 6+ months, maybe the answers are different today than they would have been 6 months ago.
True.
But we'll see what comes out.
There was a portion of the corporate world that looked at work from home as more of a, if you want to, but we're not going to support it, versus much more ongoing support. So I think we will see what the results show here. So we'll.
Yeah, and as people are voting too, I'll make one more ad that I failed to a moment ago. This chair that I'm sitting in that you can see, we do provide a chair funded by the organization. It is an ergonomically correct desk chair. That's the other thing that we make sure we mention in the overview sessions that I talked about. We provide a 7-minute video. If you've not searched or researched ergonomics, I strongly encourage you to. You'd learn a lot in a very short video. But it's critical, especially for many of us who sit on calls all day long, repetitive motion, thinking about where the screen is to your eyes, etc. I do encourage those tuning in today to spend some time checking out ergonomics.
Yeah, and I think the reality
really
is with that,
Amy,
is that there's also, regulations in California, and there's OSHA concerns, and I mean, there's all of that people have to take into consideration, which, in the height of the pandemic, when everybody was just, go home, we didn't think about, but have to on an ongoing basis, right? Yeah. So here's the results of the poll. So we have 61% of the folks out there said some equipment is supplied by the company, but the rest they have to buy for themselves out of pocket. So I think that that's not unusual response. I think the question is, of course, how do you define which is in which category? And I also think from that perspective, it's the communication of the same, right?
Yes, 100%. Um, yeah, I'm not surprised to see this. It makes sense. I will also add, depending on the organization, we happen to, have relationship with some pretty large vendors, furniture vendors. So even though we're not supplying an actual physical desk, uh, our employees have an opportunity to purchase through some discount programs. So we try to, figure out ways where we can help. But we're not deploying desks specifically, but at least the chair, we want to make sure
And
folks
Amy, you and I have
are
talked about this in
sitting
the past.
properly.
We talked about the fact that some companies are having people bring home their furniture from the office, and you say that ADP has elected not to do that.
We don't want people loading their own desk chair into their trunk of their car. So yes, it's more of a risk and that sort of thing. So we'd rather go through the process of actually deploying a new chair to a home office worker as opposed to lugging something like a chair. The last thing we'd want is someone loading it into their car and getting injured from it. So if there are items that get shipped home, anything of big, size or weight or that sort of thing, we would actually leverage a packing company to help us and get it sent to the
Cost
associates
benefit
home safely.
analysis, right? Okay, so let's go in a little
Yep.
bit different direction. I'm sure that not all managers or executives in the organization readily embrace work from home. Can you talk a little bit about how managers' opinions of work from home have evolved up to COVID and maybe some changes since COVID?
Yeah, so I'll talk totally pre-pandemic first. Work from home or remote work or having a worker that works in a different physical location than the leader runs the gamut. Some are extremely comfortable, have always been, never even thought two different ways about it, and others um, either that never experienced it before and literally didn't know how to, was very, very foreign to them, or they had one bad experience, whatever that bad experience is, and it kind of ruined how they think about remote work. And so, pre-pandemic, over the years, I think the comfort level and the ability of leading in a virtual environment has gotten progressively better. I think with the onset of technology, hearing different stories, there's been a time, I mentioned Kate a few times, sorry, but she's done a ton of research. Um, so so I think through all of that, and just again through the growth of our own organization, like how do you continue to grow as an organization? You're never going to get 58,000 people together. So at some point, remote work is going to touch you some way, somehow. So now I'll sort of fast forward into the last 6 months, and I'll get to the end of the story, which is I think most, if not all, have fully understood that remote work works. We are not in ideal circumstances by any stretch. Today's world of remote work is not the norm. Like, when everybody rushed to go home and, the pandemic really hit, and I had many managers and leaders, both internal and external, calling me saying, this must be how you've worked all these years. And I would say, no, this is not at all normal work. This is not normal for me. Now, the level of change, I mentioned this earlier, right, for me is much smaller than perhaps others. The company I was engaging with this morning, everybody worked from the office all day. And overnight, everybody worked remote and everybody worked from home. So that was like a big shock to the system. I'll also add that I've got lots of colleagues, both leaders and employees, that have really struggled and continue to struggle. They thrive in an office environment. So working from home for them has been really hard and continues to be. So we're trying. That was my engagement this morning. Really trying to give some framework, some foundation, best practices, and that sort of thing. Anyway, I digress. So I got to the end of the story, which is remote work works. Having said that, there's still a desire 100% to get back. Everybody wants to be back together. So it's really kind of forced us, I think, as leaders and as organizations to, I want to say think about what is the purpose of a building. Like why do we have a building that we call this, XYZ corporate office or this particular building from a business perspective? And I think when you shake it all out, it's collaboration, connection, and camaraderie. People really enjoy and want to be together, even if it's just a passerby. Like every time I would travel for work and I would go to our corporate headquarters in New Jersey, I would have one meeting, but I would wrap all sorts of other meetings around it and spend usually 2 days, sometimes 3 days, depending. And I so enjoyed the time, right? I mean, it happens to be a very long commute for me, so it's not something I could do every day anyway. But the point of it is I come home refreshed. I see people that I hadn't seen, I didn't really plan to see, but it was sort of that hallway conversation that happens. So part of what leaders are trying to figure out, and I think many have done a good job on, is how do you recreate that global hallway conversation in a virtual work environment? So I'm hearing things like setting up, a lot of them have open chat lines. So WebEx, Teams, Microsoft, whatever you use, it's just like it's as if we're all in the office. So it's good morning. There's a group I'm a part of, a business resource group. We have a water cooler chat. And literally that's what it is. It's as if you and I are going up to the water cooler together and saying, oh, Peggy, how was your weekend? How's the weather in your neck of the woods? And it's that, but it's just virtual. So leaders, I think, have done, like I said, a nice job of recreating. I think many are still really missing the office-based experience, but we literally performed the biggest remote work experiment ever. And the headline, one more time, is remote work works. No one would have wanted it ever under these circumstances. So it's going to be sort of interesting as time goes on and this plays further out. But I think their tunes have changed, Peggy. That's the headline.
Some of them are still struggling, but as days go by, everybody gets a lot more comfortable with it, right? So you have a global work from home program. We haven't talked a little bit about that, but I'm sure our listeners would be very interested in how it's going for you worldwide and some of the challenges you've encountered as you deployed a work from home arrangement across the globe.
Yeah, so I mentioned, remote work and work from home has been around for decades. I think that, again, based on, anecdotal, I think a lot of it started here in the US, but it's definitely grown. We have, so I'll sort of stick in the US here. There are specific states that have certain requirements. So when we think about, a global work from home program, it's not super vanilla. I mean, it is a little bit here in the US, but, places like California, right, they require in-home ergonomic assessments. There are other countries where work from home has to be negotiated with a works council. So I know we've got a global audience on the call here today. It's absolutely critical that you invest in, I'll say, legal direction and having that legal counsel if you don't have it internally within your organization. UK is another interesting place. A couple of years back, they now instituted where all employees have the legal right to request flexible work. Not that the company has to agree to it, but they have the right to ask. But what's most critical about that for me, or what's most interesting, is it's not limited to parents and caregivers only. So I think there's an old adage even here in the US that when I turn to my leader and say, listen, I need to leave work every other Thursday at noon because I don't have daycare those days, just as an example, that was honored and that was okay. But if another colleague of mine didn't have children, but was looking for flexibility because they wanted to be a community member and spend time at their local religious affiliation or what have you, somehow that didn't seem to quite stack up to what the parents were asking for. So I think with UK's, and again, very limited knowledge as to what it is, but what I've read about it and what I understand is it's offering it to anyone, or the ability for anyone to request it. So I think that's critical. And I was reading up on this recently. Finland was leading the way back in 2011 with the most flexible working schedules in the world. So I just share a couple of specific countries. By no means am I a global expert, but flex work is not a new trend. So I think that's what I continue to hear and see through all the readings and art. I read a fair amount of articles each week on this topic, obviously. It's global, it's here. My last comment I'll make is, there are certain parts of the world where working remotely has been a very big challenge. So specifically India, Philippines, we've got colleagues in both of those areas. And there was very little, if any, work from home. Like remote work just wasn't at all a thing. So this big transition overnight has been a huge change, not just for the employees, but for the leaders, et cetera. And just making sure that folks feel as comfortable as they can and have the access to the resources that we know that they need. So it's global,
Yeah,
100%.
Something new every day, I'm sure, when you go through that. I recall a situation where we asked people from Portugal to work from home, and we found out that people who work from home in Portugal had to get paid a premium because you're asking them to work from home, which is kind of the opposite of what we think about. It's like, people save money working from home, and so that's a very different way to think about things. But let's talk about measuring the effectiveness of a work from home program. I'm not talking about individual worker productivity. I'm talking about the program itself. How do you measure whether or not a work from home program is successful?
So when I came into this role in 2012, that was really one of the first questions that we were sort of thinking about and wondering about. So because, as I shared earlier, right, this all happened organically. We didn't just wake up one day and say, we're going to send half our workforce home like that. It was not an initiative for us, nor was it just happened. And so there was definitely interest from our leadership and really as an organization to understand, like, what does this mean to us? Are we better for it? Are we worse for it? What impact does it have on all things metric related? So we did a study, and some of the factors, to answer your question, Peggy, that we looked at are things like engagement. So for the companies that track and look at engagement, so that's a key indicator. So that's that whole discretionary effort conversation. Retention turnover is definitely another piece that we looked at, right? So there was an idea that said, if I have more flexibility and if I have more autonomy in the where, when, and how work gets done, but specifically where, when we're talking about work from home, it means I'll stay longer. Another area which we can't ignore is cost savings. So it's funny you just mentioned Portugal and paying a premium. There's an entirely different school of thought that says, well, gee, Amy, you work from home, you have no commute, you don't have to wear fancy suits every day, which I am not wearing a fancy suit right now. So I have inherently lower spend as it relates to working from home versus office. So those are some of the key areas that we looked at. And I know you said, more on a program level versus a specific level. There was absolutely question on what is the overall performance and productivity of the associates themselves. So we did a case study and we looked at a subset of a population across a couple different business units. So it was there. The headline was little to no difference in productivity, which was, to me, a good answer. But it was more of the engagement was actually a tick higher at the time when we did this. And so I think what's most critical is, and I remember this so vividly, I wasn't in the role a year, I think, and I had a leader call me, asked to spend some time with me. So we got on the phone. I don't think we even had video using on a regular basis. Anyway, mindful of the clock. He said, listen, I'm struggling. And I said, what are you struggling with? he said, I have my first remote worker and I'm just really struggling. I don't know how to manage it. How do I know if they're productive? And so of course I spun the question around and said, when they were in the office, how did you know that they were productive? It was like a aha moment for him of, I'm thinking about presence equals productivity, and that's not what it is, right? It's about the work product, whatever that work product is. So the headline and I say message that I would share out with the community is, your metrics should be location agnostic. Unless you are a factory worker and I need to pass my widget to Peggy and then Peggy does her piece and she passes it to Joe, that's a different story. If you're in a knowledge worker position and you are delivering on projects, you have deliverables, whether it's events or customer service, all of that should be location agnostic at this point. Again, even pre-pandemic. So those are some of the key factors that I think are important to look at when you think about, does a work from home program
Yeah,
make
Amy, I
sense
think
to
what you're
my
saying about
organization?
individual managers is so true, though. I mean, they're used to being with people. So they equate that to, I know if they're there, I know if they're working. And the reality is that's not really the right measurable, right? It's not whether you can see them and see them working, because by the way, did you know what they were working on when they were there? I mean, how do you know they weren't on Facebook, right? So that's
Right.
um,
Exactly right.
I think that people would be very interested in creating a work from home position such as yours. So if a company is thinking about, we need somebody to coordinate this, we need somebody to help us develop this policy and work through the challenges and educate our workers and our managers and all the components that go into your position. Um, can you give some thought about what kind of skills and experiences and positioning within the organization you think makes sense?
Yeah, I've learned a lot, Peggy, over the last 8+ years in this role specifically. Some of the top things that come to my mind are relationship building skills. So we talked earlier in the conversation around cross-functional teams from IT, procurement, we've got real estate, we've got finance. There are so many different components that go into building out the program. So that's number one. Number two is, you do need that top down support. So sometimes it's a bottoms up approach. And when I say top down support, I don't mean, you need to have clear focus, or we need to be, remote, 50% remote by X date. That's not what I mean. I mean the core to having roles be somewhat amenable to somewhere on the spectrum. So I didn't mention it earlier, but I'll say it now. We had developed a remote work eligibility tool, a bit homegrown, not super robust, but it worked for our purposes. And so what that tool did was it allowed us to think about remote work in two different lenses. The first lens was the job, and the second lens was the employee themselves. So does the job lend itself to some form of remote work, and same with the employee? So there were different factors. So role, do I need special access to special equipment in the office, etc. And on the employee side, self-starter, motivated, some of those like DNA type stuff. What's most important that I'll share, and why it ties to this conversation around like, what does this role do? It's really ensuring that people understand that it's a spectrum. It's not a Peggy works in the office and Amy works from home. It's everywhere in between. And so I think if someone's sitting in my role, and for me myself, that's been most of the conversation, is breaking this notion of all or nothing, because we've been outside of all or nothing for a long time, but many are still sort of thinking in that framework. Third, because I'm mindful of the clock here as we probably need to wrap up. It's helped me that I've lived in all the worlds. So I've been, again, current full-time remote worker, travel when I need to. I've done both, right? Office and home. And then I've done the full office where I was literally there every day. So I think it's helped give me great perspective and empathy on all parts. And in addition, I've been a direct individual contributor, and I've been a leader. So I think that's also helped in, again, broaden my overall professional experience, but very specifically to the where work gets done. It's given me that lens as well. So those are my top comments.
I just wanted to wrap up here with, while no one ever predicted or wanted to be where we are today, I know you've shared that there's only 1,000 out of 58,000 employees at ADP who are actually physically working in a facility. So you've had some learnings as well with the pandemic. So what would you say are the biggest learnings since the pandemic about work from
home? I said it earlier, but I have to say it again, is remote work works. So I would also say slightly differently, remote work can work. It's not ideal for everyone. I have lots of colleagues, like I said, who are clamoring. They can't wait to get back to the office. This world just doesn't feel right to them. The lines are too blurred. And again, today's world of remote work isn't normal and isn't typical, and it won't be like this forever. So I think we can all be hopeful that there is somewhat of a normalcy ahead of us. And I think that the second one is, for me, is the level of change, which again, I mentioned already, but the level of change is really across that very similar spectrum. Some have migrated very well and easily because they kind of already, right, we took the poll earlier, they've already worked from home ad hoc or from time to time, and others never did before. So this has been like a wild ride that they want to get off as soon as possible. But I think it's really opened up organizations' eyes, leaders' eyes, and even some employees that we've got more probably flex than we ever thought we did. So that's
Amy.
A headline.
This has been terrific. I really appreciate you spending time with us today and sharing your thoughts. There's been a lot of great comments in the chat as well. So lots of people are struggling and coming up with some creative ideas as well. So I wish we had more time to spend with you, but we are at the end of our hour. So I have a few things I need to make sure that we're going to cover today. There's some upcoming things from the conference board we wanted to make you aware of. There's 3 upcoming webcast programs you might be interested in. Bringing Purpose and Vision to Life, how to bolster your organization's reputation during COVID-19. An M&A trend spotlight on rapid value capture through accelerated harmonization of past deals. Heroes Work Here, the impact of COVID-19 on employee engagement. So obviously engagement's a topic we talked about today, and we would love to have you join us for that webcast. In addition, there is a conference coming up, the Employee Engagement and Experience Global Summit, which is a virtual series with the 3rd part coming on the 1st of October. And you might want to join that. All of the parts of that series are available on demand. So if that's of interest to you, you can check out not only part 3 coming up here, but the first 2 parts as well. We'd love to have you join that. We have a $100 discount for an upcoming conference for anyone who joined us today. So you need to use the code KN1. And you can get a $100 discount on any of our upcoming conferences. One that we're highlighting today is Talent 2020, which is the new future of work, reinventing leadership, talent, and AI. That's October 6th to 7th. Again, virtual event. If you're interested, you can use your $100 discount on that or other upcoming. And then finally, we want to identify a new podcast series that's coming out. That is Capital Insights. It's brought to you by the Conference Board Human Capital Center, and it's a series of podcasts with talent executives addressing challenges and current issues across the entire spectrum of capital. So we hope you'll sign in for that. And with that, we're at the top of the hour, and we want to thank you all for joining us today, and special thanks to Amy for sharing all of her insights. I wish I could go on. I know there's a lot of things we didn't have an opportunity to cover, but thanks for your time today, Amy.
Thank you, Peggy. I so appreciate the
Yeah, it's been a
conversation
lot of fun.
and great
We
working with
want to
you on
encourage
this.
you to take the webcast evaluation that's available for all of you. We want to hear your opinions. We want to know what you thought about our experience today. And thank you all very much for your time. Take care, everybody.
You will.